Okay. Better now? So on behalf of Art Forum San Francisco, co-sponsored by South Asian departments of UC Santa Cruz, Berkeley and Stanford University, we welcome you all to Sala 2020. Thank you for being here. The topic today, as you all already know, it's Partition, the Invisible Line. Our guest speaker will be Guneeta Bhalla, who will be in conversation with Ritu Marwa. I'm sure all of you know both these ladies. Just a few house rules. You have to switch off your phones on silent. You have to not do any flash photography or any recording. And little bit about Ritu. Ritu Marwa is an award-winning author and a recognized Bay Area leader in the field of art and literature. Please give a big welcome to the two panelists. The paintings that you see on either side of the panel is done by Tanya Momi, who's here. So now I'm going to hand it over to them.
Welcome. Thank you for coming to a topic that we carry a lot of pain with, and I promise not to start crying. Just to give you like a broad spectrum, you know, in America got its independence July 4th, 1776. Britain now had turned its eyes completely on India. They needed a market for their goods. They needed cotton for and you know many other products, opium or whatever, you know. So their focus shifted. And 1857, India realized that what was going on, and there was an attempt to throw off the British. And as my professor of history in Stephens used to say, it was a turning point for India, but India failed to turn. And then there was World War I, and soldiers were recruited. Oh, also what happened was, as a result of 1857, now India became formally a part of the British Empire. And when the First World War happened, soldiers were part of the British Empire soldiers, and they were fanned out to different parts of the world to fight. And for the first time, they saw the difference between subjugated citizens and citizens. And we all know what happened: Great Depression, Second World War, and then India's independence. Britain was kind of broken, and they decided that they were going to leave India, but they were going to tear it into bits. And two bits were going to flank the larger bit, which was Pakistan, and then in the middle was India. And people were you know, displaced. We all know about this, hopefully. And this painful process that happened, these stories have been pieced together, story by story, piece by piece, by Guneeta Singh Bhalla, and we are eternally grateful to you. You are the first one, and you were a physicist, and you were at University of Berkeley, and you decided that this was your calling. And there was this, you know, the first time I heard about the 1947 archive, I was just kind of, there was no museum on partition. There were no movies made on partition in India till I saw a TV series called Tamas, and it shocked me. And this is when I grew up on partition stories. I'm a granddaughter of partition. My grandfather, and Krishna ji here. She is the witness. She was 17 in Lahore, in college, first year, and she had to leave. Five families left in one truck from Model Town in Lahore. And Amritsar and Lahore, you'll be amazed, is a 20-minute drive. They lost everything, and your father was a surgeon. And so there was obviously a lot of lifestyle, societal position, and that. So life became more precious, values were changed. So I want to ask Guneeta about this project. Could you tell us, Department of Berkeley's loss is our gain, and we want to understand the extent and depth of work, how it unfolded, what is the archive?
Okay, first of all, thank you to the organizers for having me here. Thank you for doing this, and thank you. And thanks to each of you for being here. And I already see our team members and several of our donors in the room. So thanks to each of you for coming. So about the 1947 Partition Archive, it's actually not just me. It's a lot of us working on this together. I would say over 1,000 people right now, but over time it's been at least over 11,000 families who've been involved. So essentially what we do is we document oral histories, lived memories of people who went through that time period of the 1940s. Initially we started out with just partition, but we realized that partition did not happen in a vacuum, that in effect from the stories what we were gathering is that it is an artifact of World War II, and that we needed to get, and that it didn't just affect Punjab and Bengal, that's where the lines were drawn, but it actually impacted the entire subcontinent. So our oral histories go from Kashmir down to Tamil Nadu, they go from Afghanistan to Burma, and you can really kind of get an idea of how much the subcontinent absolutely transformed in the 1940s. We have this idea, we think that there was this one giant happy India that was cut into 3 pieces, East and West Pakistan and India, but that's not true. You had more than 500 kingdoms. Some of them were over 2,000 years old. They had their own histories, and a lot of them were dominions of the British Empire, so they were independently governed by their kings, and they had their own cultures. And you had the British Indian, regions around those kingdoms. And so all of that comes out when you're documenting oral histories. And it's absolutely fascinating because you discover such a nuanced history of the subcontinent that hasn't really made it into textbooks, because we get this very simplistic picture of the South Asian story, but it's not. The actual story is very complex, very multifaceted, and you could spend a lifetime and I think barely scratch the surface. So, yeah. So in Punjab you have the East and West, and it's almost the same story pretty much. You really have the same amount of suffering on either side of the border, and I think Reena can tell you she's recorded stories on both sides of the border. And the same in Bengal. We think that not much violence happened in Bengal, but we do. But we do see a lot of violence, and in fact, Bengal it seems a little different in that the violence is really spread out over the 1940s and 1950s, whereas in Punjab it's like a sudden rupture in around 1947. Gandhi did go there, I think, after the Noakhali riots in 1946. But I think in Bengal also you had things that we don't associate with partition. You had World War II. Kolkata was bombed during World War II. You had 200,000 American troops in Bengal and East India. Eastern parts of India, northeast India, I guess you would say. And a lot of that, we're not taught in American history, you're not taught in Indian history. That impacted Bengal in a huge way. You had the famine, you had the massive famine. That, in effect, led to the Noakhali riots, right, in 1946. It led to the riots later that you see on the Great Calcutta killing. So I think Gandhi may have gone there, but I don't think it's necessarily less violent. That may have been what we were taught, but our stories are telling us something different. Definitely. So we have a lot of stories from both places. From Assam, we see something really interesting in Assam that you don't really see in Punjab. There's a very violent revolt against the British. You don't see crimes against the British in Punjab. In fact, you hear that the British were spared during the violence. But in Assam, you see a lot of violent revolt against British officers. You see their homes being burnt. You see them getting killed by protesters. But there's also something else that's interesting that we see in Assam. We see intermarriage between the British and local indigenous women, which we do, especially tribal women. You don't see that really in Sindh and Punjab and sort of the northwestern regions. Hyderabad, what we're hearing from the stories is there's a lot of nostalgia because especially around the law and order, people consider that in the days of the Nizam, there was more law and order. There was a lot of promotion of women's education. So that's what we're hearing through the story. And of course, a lot of the people that left, a lot of people that fled in 1948. Yeah, in this case, I think we may have a witness in the room who may be able to tell us that firsthand. But from what we're seeing and kind of agreeing with what you're saying, is we see that the younger people are able to adapt more easily. But we hear stories of people's elders who you hear a lot of people having strokes, heart attacks. I don't even know if those deaths are accounted for, in the official counts. But you hear a lot of suffering in people 40 and older who it was very difficult to adapt to that type of sudden uprooting.
With what in one truck, 3 families left whatever they could take. My parents took about 2 boxes. They were all put into camps between Amritsar and Delhi. That was the refugee camp. So they were not taken completely to the Amritsar. I mean, they are left because they are in busy transporting people from one area to the other. In the morning when they got up, even what they had taken, there was nothing. People had opened the screws from the back, lifted the tent up a little and from back. From the front the lock is there, but there is nothing in there. And my father's first reaction was, good riddance. Where would I carry this, on my head or I carry my children? Yes. So he said, good riddance. Or this is the bad rubbish for me now. I got no house, no nothing to put. It's okay. It's lost. Yes. No, but they're giving you the option. There are 2 families, 3 families going in one truck. You're more concerned with taking your children into it rather than boxes. So whatever they took also, my father's response was, good riddance. What will I do with these 2 boxes? They're going to Amritsar and then finding some place to stay. A cousin of his was there. And at that time, there were over 50 people staying there. Their house was open. They said, whoever comes, we will feed the langar. No. From Lahore border into Amritsar. No, that was, yes, one of the cousins. No. In Amritsar. Wagah was the border at that time. Wagah border you crossed, and then Punjab, then Amritsar started.
Yeah. True. Yes, he did. I was actually, 1945, my mother died, and 2 years later, the children, the boys were sent to Missouri for education. The sisters were all sent to Roorkee in India, and he was alone. And he had full confidence that the British Army would actually protect the Hindus. Exactly. It was run by the railways, and he had good friends among the British employees over there. The unfortunate, or the fortunate part of his escape was that he had some Muslim friends. And going back a little bit to the confidence of the British, he actually, prior to partition, left Lahore and went to Amritsar. And then a few days later, he returned because he read in the newspapers that everything was quiet. And when he reached the Lahore station, there was nobody there on the platforms. And he was, again, those friends of his told him, take the first train out. There's going to be massacre on this platform. And with that advice, of course, he didn't have time to go back home and pick up any valuables or whatever he wanted to take with him. He took the train to Amritsar, it was delayed, but it managed to start. On the way, actually he reached Atari, that is the Wagah border, and later on Khasa, the station. There the train stopped. Yes. Right. Yes.
I think people do want to share. I think they just needed that platform. And quite often it is true, and Reena can probably confirm this, people don't often want to share within their own family. They don't want to share those dark stories in the family. They're more willing to speak to somebody who's not in their family. And that's where we come in. Yeah. Pretty much everybody has been open to sharing. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Reach me. I can speak loudly. I'll speak loudly. So I've never seen this.
Yes. Get on with it. Yes. Can you believe that? And that's the value that 1947. How many stories do you have? And your work is carrying on. And are you doing more video interviews now? It has always been video. I see my aunt was. So now, what I want to understand is, I find that, let's say today I'm in California and I hear some news that California is going to be divided between Mexico and America, and I may fall on either side or whatever. When did they find out where the actual line was?
Well, most people from our interviews, we can tell, except unless they lived in the big cities, didn't even know this was happening. And people we've interviewed, now, with social media, I think everybody knows, but even 5-6 years ago, people we've interviewed in rural areas, they were like, I still don't know why I had to move. They still, to this day, did not know why they had to move. So forget about, the news that California is going to be divided. You're just sitting at home and suddenly you have to run through your life, and you don't know why, and you never find out why for the rest of your life. So that was the reality for a lot of people.
What I found actually very interesting was, like, if I was in that situation and I had so much land, so much investment, what comes first, religion or land? You could convert and just stay.
A lot of people did that. A lot of people did that. No.
So religion is not.
No.
No, I think that I was talking about surgeons in modern town. I'm talking about the railway people who had that kind of lifestyle. I'm talking about people who had businesses. Your father had a cutlery business which he had just established. Your chacha had just established a factory. And they were told that there is a possibility something may happen. They didn't accept it. He had a Muslim partner, for heaven's sake, and his daughters or his buas went to the village square, and किसी ने वो चुन्नी को आग लगा दी, they burnt the dupatta, and he said, what the hell, came as a big shock. And then they called around, found out, and they said all the girls in your family have been earmarked, and it's better that you send them away. And then the girls were sent away, but your father and your chacha stayed. They stayed for the businesses, and then the chacha's business got burnt down, and your dad realized that I think it's time that we sell my share. And word was put out, but before anything could happen, a mob came to your doorstep, your father's doorstep. You were 1 year old. And July 15th. But the mobs that reached your house said, right. Yeah. And what I find really survived by sheer chance, but also very interestingly, your father, Chacha and Pupar reached the railway, and a cousin reached the railway station where there was a train to Pakistan. They were going to step in it, and one of the employees said, Sethji, is train pe mat chalo. And they listened. They didn't think, oh, maybe he has an ulterior motive or whatever. They just stepped out immediately. So the trains, just to establish, they are on the station. There are trains going in either direction. One which is heading to India, there's disturbances on. The one heading deeper into Pakistan is safe. And they decide, three of them, to get on the train going deeper into Pakistan towards Rawalpindi. But the fourth person got onto the Sialkot train because his wife was there, and he thought, I'd rather go to India, and he was never heard from. And they reached Rawalpindi and took a cab to Kashmir, and they arrived safely. But your father passed away at a very young age, at 34. And this is when he had not much loss of property. They had something. So I want to ask you, Guneeta, when you come and collect these stories, they are memories. They have individual voices from long back, like you are remembering when you were 17 or 19 now. Is there, do you find that it gives you the true picture, or do you think there are biases in oral history?
When you're talking about experiences, I don't think you're going to get that like bias. It's what people actually experience. I mean, through their own bias. It's everybody's own bias, right? So you have thousands of biases in that way. But yeah, you're talking about people's experiences and what they actually went through.
But you know what I find really interesting is our conversation yesterday that we had, and you said that now at the age of 93 you are forgetting things, that you mix up people, but the partition stays crystal clear in your mind. Very clear. So the values became, the zameen and the watan and the mitti, and I heard stories of people going back to their land, collecting some mittis.
If they were farmers, if they were in the which is a majority of people. Most people were agrarian, so they had that connection. But if you're living in Lahore, most likely you don't have that same connection to going back. I'm sure you've heard these things. Yeah.
And actually, my grandfather was also a doctor in the railways and was on the same platform, probably, as your father. And he didn't want to go back. He also sent his girls, he had three daughters and my father. And they left, and then he was like, he probably was like me. And basically, he didn't believe anything would happen to him. He was a doctor, he was in the railways. And then somebody who looked like him was still on the platform, and then he realized people were not willing to accept that this was going to happen. So I wanted to ask you that, you have the analogy of the elephant and the six blind men, and that each blind man sees his section of the story. Does the 1947 archive give us the elephant?
I think it gives us a more of the elephant than we do have now, because we do have a lot of communities who see partition through their specific perspective, but actually there are a lot of perspectives, and we don't have that big picture right now. And once we get the big picture, maybe we'll become less polarized as a society.
But on that token, actually, less polarized as a society, but we know which direction we are going right now. Does that impact anything in 1947 with the present climate?
Yeah, I'd prefer not to comment on the present because there's so many heated perspectives out there, and any perspective is going to draw some sort of a heated response, no matter where you are. But yeah, I think 1947 is very relevant to what's happening now.
And so do you think the museum is going to, the Amritsar Museum
Yeah.
is a new thing. so you think that you expect it to grow?
Well, the Amritsar Museum, they're not a cross-border project, so they're going to have one perspective. I can't really speak for the museum very much, but I can tell you that they are operating in a specific environment. As an international project, we are able to maintain that neutrality and really give us a true picture. I mean, it depends. What are you looking for? Are you looking to history to support your political views, or are you looking to history to really, really understand the past? So it depends on that. And of course, we're taking that scientific approach of really trying to understand the past and gathering all of the possible data points.
How do you think the generation that is given, like I grew up in the story, but what about my children, my grandchildren? How is this a legacy for them?
I think they'll have.
So that is don't carry the pain and just forget it. So actually, you know what, this is something that I have struggled with also myself, because every city has a Holocaust museum. And I have gone to every Holocaust museum, I think, in the world. And there is no story of partition on media that I grew up watching till that Tamas came out. And then when I saw the archive. And so this is some, it needs to heal by forgetting about it.
So I completely understand your perspective. For your generation, that is very true. But for those of us who come after and have inherited this state of affairs, we have this deep desire to understand. Actually, we're trying to heal that enmity because it's getting worse. That's what's happening. Yeah.
No, she did say that. She did say that. So you had a story that. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, especially from UP. A lot of people migrated. I can answer that. The individual picture, the individual stories, they, well, not just that they matter, but they provide a lot of the answers that, the questions that you just asked, they may provide the answers, but you will have to look into the archive.
No, actually, you know what, I want to say something, Guneeta, in that you said that the violence was not caused by individuals, that it was caused by groups who were motivated. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I can talk about a lot of the different violence, and I think Reena can also probably pitch in here. So we see, okay, there's something really fascinating here, and I know there's a lot of pressing questions, so hold that thought for a moment. So there's something really, really fascinating, and this is why you need to get the individual stories to get the big picture, because it's not taught in any of our textbooks in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh. What was going on in Europe in the early 1900s was hugely influential in the subcontinent. You had black shirts, brown shirts, you had all these groups. You had Lal Kurti, the red shirts, you know, Sarhadi Gandhi, his followers. You had the RSS, similar, they had a uniform too. You had a lot of groups with uniforms who had different agendas, very much borrowed concept from Europe, okay? So some of these groups had very different idea of what the subcontinent should look like when the British left. And this is how the violence went out of control, because the British had lost control. Their administrative skills were like, you know, like a, what would you call it, like a paper castle or whatever, you know. They were just non-existent, pretty much. And when the people discovered that they were non-existent, they could do whatever they want. You see all these different groups with very different motivations starting to really go after each other. You had the Maharajas who wanted their kingdoms to remain independent. You had ideas of the subcontinent being split into 5 different countries. But of course the British, as you know, were afraid of the Russian influence, of the Soviet, of what eventually became the Soviet Union, to grow and absorb these Maharajas who they felt were not going to be very easily, who were not going to be able to put up resistance. So you had a lot of geopolitical motivations. The United States was involved in creating what ended up happening in South Asia. So it's a very big story. You do need to look into the individual stories to get the results.
Tell us about the United States
I'll just very, very briefly say, so you probably want to look into the Bretton Woods Accords. You probably want to look into the fact that the US dollar suddenly became supreme. You want to look into the fact that at this time, the British received a massive multi-billion-dollar grant from the US under the condition that they would leave their colonies ASAP. They got the grant in March 1948. Maybe that's why they accelerated the timeline to, August 1947. There were people within the British administration who were saying, no, we need 10 years to do this properly so that it's not so violent. But it was accelerated. There was a there was a transition from the Conservatives to the Labour Party in England, and there was a disconnect between the policies from one party to another. That was also happening. And of course, the post-war rebuilding in England played a huge role in how things really quickly fell apart in what happened in 1947 in South Asia. So that's what we're seeing from the stories.
I think that Churchill, we know the famous statement that I have not become the Prime Minister to dismember the British Empire, right? And then Churchill lost power in England, and the new Labour Party came in. Was it actually? Yeah, and they had a different agenda. So sometimes the elephant has to be seen, but you need to see the little pieces, little parts, and sometimes you can miss the big picture as to what drives communities to behave. So you felt when we spoke that it was not the individuals so much.
People were polarized, and you had a lot of young boys who were polarized, many of them who have come forward with their stories, and they talked about the murders that they committed and why they committed them and who drove them to do that. And certain groups which are active today were active back then as well.
say, I get your point. I get your point. Do you agree with the point that it was able to be silver?
It's very important. Because I'm not taking anything, I'm just simply telling you what the 10,000 witnesses when you read the story you will get.
Very good.
That's all.
Very good.
I'm
Very
not
good. Do you have a comment? And do you have a comment?
Well, so I'll just say this is definitely true to an extent. The only small area where I would differ is neighbors mostly seem to protect each other, but maybe neighboring mohallas, because the mohallas had their own perspectives. Yeah.
I'm just telling you. All she said was, I loved my India. We are Muslims. And she said, Gandhiji never said, you make your decision after the night of prayer. And Hyderabad was an independent state, and my father was in a position to be Nizam of Hyderabad. So she stayed back. But what I'm facing right now, what Hafiz was facing, which is horrible. And Martami Khaja is a very good friend of mine. You all can log into and see what he says. He says, during the mutiny, mullahs and pandits were bought by British to divide us. And the same formula is happening today also. We are being divided and used because we could prosper. Like my family friend is Satya Nadella, Bhanga, and my husband runs a company. They all from the same school, and we are doing so well. So imagine if all this was given to us in India, where India would be today. So, we have to understand, it's not Muslim.
So I also want to make a point because I just heard the cut-off.
Okay, that's what my point was. So we all need to get along as one.
Thank you, and do read your blog. I want to say something before we are told that we are leaving. Tanya Momi remembers being. Sorry.
It's just, she was saying that it's not about Muslims. And no, it's not. It's white colonizers that were doing this for decades and decades and decades. And the partition is one piece of a much larger history.
So I understand that, but before we go there, and I know this is a topic that we can talk endlessly about, I do want to mention Tanya Momi because my phone's dying out of battery and my laptop has given up anyway. So Tanya Momi remembers as a little girl because she was born in independent India. She remembers her grandmother taking the thread, gold thread and stitching moti out of the clothes of that they had. In those days they used real, but now also maybe they use real metal that has value in the gota work, and she used to sell that because two of her daughters were married, but she also had two other daughters and three daughters and a young son to feed, and her father had passed away, he was in the police department, so she had to make ends meet. And so Tanya has that. The point is that the intergenerational trauma that Meena mentioned has come down to people like Tanya and me. Tanya was born in independent India, I was born in independent India, Vijay was born in independent India, and this is her artwork that depicts And I definitely feel we are untethered from that Victorian mother, and then we have now the world to explore. And this is, I'm not going to presume to explain Kanya Moni's paintings. She visited her mother's land. She came back. She made this beautiful painting, and I know what it means, but I am not going to explain this. If you guys want to know, please talk to Kanya Moni after this, and I'm going to take that question.
When I came to the US, I met some Hindu families who grew up in Pakistan. They were Hindus and Parsis in Pakistan. I also have a very good set of Muslim friends who stayed back in India. Are these stories also being recorded? Because what they said,
Absolutely.
their stories were just incredible, not about crossing the line. They stayed back, and their stories are very different from the ones that over the years.
She has a very interesting story to conclude this. Please.
Yeah, but it's not a story about staying back, is that it?
No, but she said, are you recording stories
Of
both
course.
sides of the
Yeah.
audience? All sides.
Yeah, we're recording all sides and all kinds. So even if people stay back, so we have a lot of stories from Sindh of Hindus who still remain there, Sikhs who live in the north in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and then you have stories of, obviously many Muslim families who stayed. Who, I don't even want to use that word "stayed." That's like a modern bias. Who continue to live. Yeah. So. So that's it. I'll just relay a quick story that really allowed me to.
For a story, and she told me this. And Guneeta, can you also talk about the book, please? Because
Oh, yeah.
just 1 minute.
We've got a book coming out. It's called 10,000 Memories.
Let's just continue the conversation, like I said.
So, okay, I'll tell the quick story. So basically, there was a lady who was migrating from East Punjab to West Punjab. And she was talking about how a lot of the women were getting kidnapped at that time. And the way she protected herself was by covering herself in mud. So if she looked really filthy, she was less likely to get kidnapped. But she spoke of this one story where once they crossed safely into Pakistan, into West Punjab, they came across this Sikh man on the top of a tree. And when they asked him, and he kept screaming that he was looking for a river. And when they asked him why, it turned out that he had 7 sons and 7 daughters. He had seen all 7 of his sons get murdered in front of him, and all 7 of his daughters were kidnapped. And he had gone crazy. And so he was standing on top of this tree, and no one could bring him down, looking for a river so he could commit suicide. I mean, when we first heard this story, some of us couldn't work for several days. It was quite wild, but that was what was going on. So there was a lot of mental health issues, especially in Punjab after what happened.
How can we read these stories?
So that's the book. Yeah, 10,000 Memories. You can actually visit the website, 10,000memories.com, and learn more about the book.